Amid the quiet hum of servers in a high-security building near The Hague, Willem de Groot adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and stared at the flickering data streams cascading across three monitors. The naval intelligence officer had spent over 2 decades tracking maritime developments, but something about today's satellite readouts gnawed at him. A strange pattern, almost like a ghost signature, was repeating across global ports, invisible to commercial observers yet distinct to someone with his kind of clearance. These weren't anomalies, they were fingerprints. Far from the geopolitical spotlight, the Netherlands had always played a curious role in global affairs. Small in size, modest in population, yet disproportionately powerful where it counted: shipbuilding, electronics, and semiconductors. Willem wasn't just an analyst. He was one of the few in Europe who truly understood how integrated Dutch systems were within the navies of the world's two titans, the United States and China. He pulled up a classified report stamped with a crimson NATO insignia. It detailed a recent audit of naval components used aboard U.S.-guided missile destroyers. Radar arrays, Dutch-made; fire control software, modified in Rotterdam; communication encryptors, built and tested in Eindhoven. The deeper he looked, the clearer it became. The American fleet depended on the quiet engineering prowess of his tiny country. And that dependency wasn't mutual. In a boardroom a few kilometers away, Anneke van Rossum, CEO of Damen Shipyards, paced slowly as a conference call with American defense officials concluded. Her calm exterior hid a sharp, strategic mind honed over years of navigating the world's most volatile defense contracts. The Americans wanted faster delivery on 2 new littoral combat ships, but her team was stretched thin. China, too, had recently reached out, quietly, discreetly, through a third party in Singapore, with a lucrative proposal for civilian maritime upgrades. Anneke knew better. In this game, civilian was always a matter of interpretation. She paused at the window, watching cranes pivot over steel hulls under construction. Her phone buzzed. A message from Willem. "They're overlapping frequencies now. It's intentional." Her breath caught for a moment, not out of fear, but anticipation. The dance had begun again. On the other side of the globe, aboard the USS Decatur, Lieutenant Commander Mark Reyes reviewed a new software patch for the ship's radar interface. It had arrived via secure uplink and came from a Thales, Netherlands substation. Reyes, a seasoned officer with tours in the South China Sea, trusted the tech. It had saved his crew from a Chinese near miss 2 years ago. But as he ran diagnostics, an alert flashed. "Latency spike in data buffer." He frowned. It wasn't a failure. It was too deliberate, too surgical, like a signal or a test. Back in China's Jiangnan shipyard, naval technician Feng Hao examined the newly installed EW suite aboard the Type 055 destroyer. The components had arrived through a European intermediary and bore no flag or brand, but he recognized the design principles. Dutch. He'd trained with similar systems at a joint workshop in Shanghai years ago, under visiting instructors who'd been independent consultants. Dutch engineers with military clearance backgrounds. Feng was no stranger to dual-use technologies. He also knew what Anneke's ships were capable of. China didn't need to outgun the USNavy if it could outthink and outmaneuver them. And to do that, they needed the source code. As Willem pieced together encrypted packets bouncing across global naval communications, a realization formed like frost on glass. The Dutch weren't just vendors, they were gatekeepers. Through radar systems, logistics chains, chip architecture, and encrypted communications, the Netherlands held keys no one else did. And while both China and the U.S. believed they were in control, neither could act without Dutch cooperation or silence. The conflict was no longer about missiles or manpower. It was about leverage. And right now, his country had more of it than anyone understood. That leverage had remained unspoken for decades, buried beneath neutrality and commerce. But geopolitical gravity was shifting, and someone, maybe both sides, was about to force the issue. The Dutch government, largely unaware of how deep its influence ran, continued to treat these matters as purely economic. Contracts were reviewed, policies updated, but the broader implications remained clouded in plausible deniability. Only a few insiders like Willem and Anneke understood the stakes, and even they disagreed on how long the Netherlands could walk the tightrope. As storm clouds of global rivalry gathered once again over the Pacific and cyber warfare became the new arms race, a simple but chilling thought echoed in Willem's mind. What happens when both giants realize they're holding the same leash, and we're the ones in the middle? He tapped out a secure message to Anneke. "We need to talk, soon." She read it in silence, then closed her laptop. Outside, the shipyard roared with activity. Inside, she felt the weight of choices that could change the course of two empires, and the tiny country between them. In a sleek glass office overlooking Amsterdam's financial district, Anneke van Rossum studied the dossier spread across her desk. The details were precise: U.S. defense acquisition pathways, Chinese satellite calibration frequencies, even maintenance intervals for radar arrays used in both navies. The information wasn't stolen. It had been offered, quietly, willingly. Each piece arrived under a different guise: consultancy reports, supplier audits, technology white papers. Together, they painted a mosaic that confirmed what Anneke already suspected. Both global powers were becoming aware of the subtle influence her country wielded, and they were maneuvering to take it. She closed the file as Willem de Groot entered without knocking. His expression was grim, his eyes carrying the fatigue of someone who had seen too many classified truths. "It's time," he said simply, taking a seat opposite her. "The Americans are running simulations to see what happens if we cut them off. Temporarily, of course. They're calling it a resilience test. And the Chinese are adjusting code in their latest EW modules. They've begun developing redundancies for our firmware." Anneke leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "So they're both preparing for life without us?" "No," Willem replied. "They're preparing to either dominate us or coerce us. And frankly, I don't think either will be patient much longer." Across the Atlantic, in a high-level Pentagon briefing room, Rear Admiral Lauren Thorne reviewed a presentation that detailed vulnerabilities in U.S. naval systems tied to Dutch supply chains. It wasn't just parts. It was architecture, intricate, deeply embedded, and nearly impossible to replace without years of redesign. The report's tone was cautious but laced with urgency. If the Netherlands ever shifted allegiance, even implicitly, the U.S. Pacific Fleet's operational superiority could be compromised. Thorne understood the danger, but she also recognized the opportunity. "If we can bring them fully into our fold," she said to her advisors, "we lock out Beijing without firing a shot. But if we push too hard, they might pivot, and that would be a strategic nightmare." Meanwhile, in a secured intelligence facility in Beijing, Feng Hao presented his own analysis to a panel of senior PLA officers. His findings echoed Thorne's conclusions. Dutch systems were too influential and too integrated to ignore. But Feng suggested something bolder. "Rather than outcompeting the Dutch," he said, "we must offer them sovereignty, autonomy. Unlike the Americans, we can promise non-interference in their industrial policy. Appeal to their independence. That's our leverage." Back in Amsterdam, Willem and Anneke continued their tense conversation. "We can't stay neutral forever," he said, voice low but firm. "They're closing in. If one side forces our hand, the other will retaliate. Economically, politically, maybe even digitally." Anneke rose and walked toward the window, watching ships glide along the IJ River. "You're suggesting we choose." "I'm suggesting we prepare," Willem corrected. control the narrative, assert our terms before they're dictated to us. As they spoke, the Dutch Prime Minister convened a secretive council of national security advisors. Unmarked folders were passed around, containing reports authored by Willem and his team. Their contents outlined a stark reality. The Netherlands' defense and tech industries had become the hidden fulcrum in a global contest of influence. If the government didn't define its role soon, someone else would. The Prime Minister tapped her fingers against the table, deep in thought. What if we initiate a trilateral tech accord? With transparency provisions, we let both sides know we're aware of their moves without choosing either. One advisor nodded slowly. It buys us time, maybe leverage. But Willem, watching from a remote link, knew it wouldn't be enough. Time was already in short supply. Later that evening, Anneke attended a discreet reception at the Royal Netherlands Navy's command headquarters in Den Helder. The event celebrated a new line of offshore patrol vessels, but the real conversations happened behind closed doors. A U.S. naval attaché toasted the joint projects between American and Dutch defense firms. Moments later, a Chinese commercial envoy praised Dutch neutrality and commitment to open cooperation. Both sides smiled. Both knew the stakes. Anneke caught sight of Willem standing alone, sipping a drink and scanning the room with practiced calculation. She approached, her voice low. If we wait too long, they'll make the decision for us. Willem nodded, not in agreement, but in resignation. Then we better decide what kind of influence we really want. Outside, the wind picked up over the dark waters of the North Sea. Far beyond the horizon, warships from both superpowers maneuvered silently, carrying systems born in Dutch factories, guided by software written in Dutch labs. The question wasn't who controlled whom. The question was, how long could the Netherlands keep both levers in hand before the weight broke one? And when that moment came, would it be a choice or a reckoning? In the early hours of a rainy Rotterdam morning, a black SUV slipped through a service entrance at the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Anneke van Rossum stepped out, her coat pulled tightly against the cold drizzle. She wasn't scheduled to be there, at least not officially. Inside, Willem was already waiting, a secured folder in front of him. It bore the title, Directive 07, Strategic Autonomy Protocol. The Americans know, he said flatly, not bothering with pleasantries. One of their satellites picked up the test signal from our fallback system. They haven't confronted us directly, but they've cut access to 2 development environments as a warning. Anneke removed her gloves slowly, processing. And the Chinese? Still quiet, Willem replied. Too quiet. But our traffic monitors caught a coordinated pattern out of Shenzhen, targeting our infrastructure mapping tools. They're not asking for access, they're preparing to take it. A long pause filled the room. Then Anneke said what neither of them wanted to admit. So this is it. No more balancing act. Willem nodded. It's time to declare our intent. If we stall again, we lose the initiative, and with it, our influence. Elsewhere, Rear Admiral Lauren Thorne sat in a private meeting with a top official from the State Department. They were reviewing a contingency proposal, Operation Keystone, a strategy to bypass Dutch systems through an accelerated domestic manufacturing initiative. The plan was ambitious and expensive, but necessary if diplomatic efforts failed. They have to know what's at stake, Thorne said, setting the file aside. If they think they can remain neutral while controlling Keystone infrastructure, they've misread the board. The diplomats sighed. They haven't misread it. They just think they can redraw it. Across the globe, in Beijing, Feng Hao watched a dry dock trial of a new destroyer class, the Jiangwei X. What no one on the platform knew, aside from him, was that its radar suite now ran on a fully decoupled architecture, one designed specifically to replace Dutch firmware. It worked, but barely. The signal strength dipped during stress tests, and targeting lagged under complex simulations. "We'll make it work," Feng assured his superiors, "but we'll need at least 2 years to reach parity." That same afternoon, in a conference room outside The Hague, the Dutch Prime Minister convened her most trusted advisors. On the table was a proposal that had taken months to draft, a declaration of digital neutrality. It would establish the Netherlands as a sovereign digital state, committed to equal access, full transparency, and refusal to weaponize its influence for either side. Annika sat near the head of the table, listening as arguments for and against the declaration unfolded. Some saw it as visionary, a bold new standard for middle powers in an increasingly multipolar world. Others warned it was naive, even dangerous. "We'll make ourselves a target," one minister argued. "Not a bridge, but a battleground." "No," Annika countered. "We'll make ourselves essential, not by hiding our value, but by defining it on our own terms." Outside the secure perimeter of the room, both Washington and Beijing were already preparing responses. The Americans sent a diplomatic overture, an offer of enhanced security cooperation and joint cyber development. The Chinese extended a trade proposal tied to satellite constellations and orbital communications. Both proposals were generous. Both came with conditions. That night, Annika and Willem met in private, walking silently along the city's canals. The rain had cleared, leaving the air sharp and still. For a moment, they said nothing, just watching the reflection of lights ripple across the water. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Willem finally asked. Annika didn't answer right away. She stared out at the horizon, where the water disappeared into fog. "It's not about right or wrong anymore," she said softly. "It's about survival. And the only way we survive this, intact, is if we make ourselves too vital to threaten and too transparent to manipulate." Willem nodded, accepting the weight of that answer. "Then we move forward." The next morning, the Dutch government unveiled its Declaration of Digital Neutrality. It was met with surprise, skepticism, and applause in equal measure. Global media scrambled to interpret the move, while military analysts debated its implications. Tech firms praised it as visionary. Defense experts called it risky. But behind the headlines, a shift had begun. In Washington, Rear Admiral Thorne read the declaration in full, then closed her laptop with a quiet exhale. "They've drawn their line," she said to no one in particular. "Now we see who respects it." In Beijing, Feng Hao reviewed the same document and sent a short, encrypted message to a high-level contact. "They've chosen visibility over silence. That makes them predictable, which makes them manageable." And in a lab outside Eindhoven, a group of engineers deployed the final update to a secure firmware hub now monitored in real time by both domestic and international observers. It was open, accessible, but still built on Dutch soil. As the world watched, the Netherlands didn't shrink. It didn't disappear behind alliances or adversaries. It stepped forward, small, resolute, and unmistakably in control of its own course. The game had not ended. It had simply entered a new phase,